Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good afternoon. I hope you all are doing well during these times. Thank you for joining us. We'd like to welcome you to our panel breakout session. We hope you feel inspired and moved by the opening plenary. The many topics that were covered on transformation and the transformation we strive for in our movements through our liberatory framework. I'd like to give thanks to all the presenters and panelists so far who have grounded us in the vision and purpose of living liberation and the theme of this conference and what it really means in the day-to-day. I hope that the themes of the conversations so far have resonated with you, and we hope for even a deeper discussion today to kind of bring some more perspective to the conditions that we face in our communities. I have the pleasure of moderating this panel to continue the topic of liberatory lens and how we engage and define that in our communities. We have a powerhouse lineup in this panel to lead us into how we can further discuss the practices that reflect our values. Real quick, I'll introduce myself. My name is Juana Teresa Tello. I am an organizer, educator, and cultural worker based out of the Bay Area, San Francisco to be exact. I'm representing C2, the Center for Third World Organizing. I am the program manager who is overseeing the Movement Activist Apprenticeship Program this upcoming year. So I'm very excited and honored to moderate and to lead us into discussion. Thankful for everybody's time and hopeful that we have what we need around us to just be present, to be well, and to receive all this good medicine that our panelists have for us. So I'd like to kick us off, and what I'd like to start with is just a brief introduction of all of our panelists before I go over a framing of our purpose and outcomes and dive into the questions. I'd like to ask each panelist to please introduce yourself with your name, your pronoun, location, and organizational affiliation. And if you could briefly share what brought you into this movement, just to give us a little bit of some life of, what were the things that brought you and that really deepened your connection and commitment to this movement for social justice. I'd like to kick it off and maybe send it to Stephanie to kick us off. Thank you.
Thank you, Juana. Thank you for this opportunity to be in community with you all. I want to thank the conference organizers. My name is Stephanie Yazji. I use she, her pronouns. I am based in Brooklyn, and I work at the Center for Popular Democracy. I think what brought me into the movement, I remember from a young age having a strong sense of or a hunger, I guess, like a longing for justice. I used to have a deep connection to animals. And so I got into kind of a little bit of animal liberation advocacy work. I also kind of grew up in a household where my father felt very strongly about what was happening on the news. That's all I remember. And he was always really animated about it. My mom kind of served as like the kind of central matriarch who helped a lot of our family that immigrated over from Syria. So I spent a lot of my kind of childhood just recognizing kind of a sense of what is just. And I came to the movement for more belonging with people that felt the same way. Thank you.
Kick it off if it's okay with Greg to go next, and then San, that would be really great. And then I'll do a formal introduction before we jump into the questions.
Cool. Good morning. It's an honor to be here with all of you virtually. We're still having to do virtual things that I can't wait until we do everything in person again. My name is Greg Hodge. I'm the son of Bobby and David Hodge, the father of Chukwudi, Shanaka, Kumi, Imani, and Adia. I sit in Ohlone country. My pronouns are he, him, his, and y'all. And y'all because I represent the South where I grew up, as well as California where I live now. After growing up in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and growing up in two church communities that were about service, it was a natural for me to be a part of the things I've been part of for the last 40 or so years. I've been part of the Freedom Schools movement with young people here in the Bay Area. I was one of the original founders of the Freedom Schools. I've done a lot of policy work around youth development issues like Oakland Fund for Children and Youth, and Alliance for Boys and Men of Color. And so a lot of the work I've done has carried me both around the country and here in my own community, where we struggle for the liberation, full and complete liberation of Black people. And as we bring our friends along who are in transformative solidarity with us, for all human beings. And so I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit today. The thing that I like to do when I'm outside is garden. So keeping my hands in the dirt. It's something I grew up doing. And it's funny, as a young person, you think of things as a chore that now you think it's as a blessing. And so the chore I had was to be, cleaning up behind the dog in the yard and doing all that, and then cutting the grass. And over time, I began to appreciate being on the earth even that much more. And so I'm looking forward to today's conversation.
All right. What's up, y'all? Definitely honored and blessed to be here with everyone, and much love to the C2 family and to all of the organizers that pulled this together. My name is Sa'an Bell. I'm the Senior Associate Director with Power California. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm representing Oakland, Long Beach, Inglewood. And just really briefly, like what brought me to the movement. I know, like many of y'all, there's multiple experiences and stories that brought us to the movement, but the one that I'm thinking about in particular is, I think a big part of what brought me here is my mother and my father. I mean, my father is a Southerner from Greenville, Alabama, who joined the Air Force and met my mother in the Philippines. And her experience as a Filipino immigrant and my father's experience as a Southerner, and trying to really break the generations of poverty and violence within both of their families is what really brought me to do this work. And it's really what pushes me to show up in this work every day. And I'm gonna pass it back to you, Juana.
Appreciate you all. Just wanted to give you all opportunity to speak about yourselves, your lived experiences, and what humanizes us, right? The human experience that brought us to this movement that is so diverse, from the many different positions that we're representing today. Just a quick intro from what I read the bios and learning about your work, and also seeing the impact of your work. Stephanie Yazgi, I hope I'm saying that correctly, is an organizer, educator, strategist, and facilitator, also coalition builder, and is a director of training and network development for the Center for Popular Democracy, overseeing the capacity building and engaging partners to explore and implement innovations in their field. A lot of their experience has been really working in electoral campaigns, and bringing a lot of that experience over the last 20 years to think about how we're building movements across the country. So very thankful for you to join us. Greg Hodge, another powerhouse facilitator, strategist, international bridge builder in the Black community, a longtime advocate for all Oaklanders, also seeing that you identify as a cultural worker, a drummer, right, an artist. So bringing all the beauty that we have into this movement, into the spaces of empowerment and culture. He represents as the executive director of Executive Alliances for Boys and Men of Color, Safe Passages and Urban Strategies Council, and California Tomorrow. And like Sans Bell had mentioned, is also an organizer, trainer, strategist, and writer, deeply rooted in the West Coast, all the cities you named, Long Beach, Oakland, thinking about your Southern roots. Representing Californians for Justice for the last 11 years, developing the leadership of Black and Brown youth, shifting narratives through policy and civic engagement campaigns. Also a graduate of BOLD, Black Organizing Leadership and Dignity program, specifically held for directors and lead organizers in 2013, 2016. So I feel very honored. Just wanted to recap some of the things that, some of the reasons why we invited you to be part of this conversation, to share your personal experience, your political experience, and how we're looking at this liberatory lens. And just for a little bit of framing before we dive in, a little bit on the purpose of this panel, we really want to explore how we build power differently and how we strive to not replicate models of the past. And so a lot of this discussion is hoping that we can dive into how we build power in a way that centers love, in a ways that are constructive, generative, and relational. And some of the outcomes that we have is we hope that participants today in receiving this medicine get a sense of how panelists have seen this done through concrete examples of power building in your work through a liberatory lens, and really that this is an opportunity for how we collectively define what that liberatory lens is in the diverse context that you all are working in. So in terms of process, we have a few prefigured questions to ask to just initiate the conversation, get our ideas flowing. I'll read the questions, provide space for each of you to answer before moving forward. I also hope that we can have some organic flow and opportunity for you all as panelists to jump in and respond to each other as well. And at the end of our questions, I'll be monitoring the question and answer portion through the chat. So feel free throughout today's discussion. If anything resonates with you, let us know you're here. Put your comments in the chat, put your questions in the chat. We'll circle back to those at the end to make sure that we try to also include our participants who are joining us from across the country. So really thankful again. And with your permission, we're going to kick off. So our very first question is power for who? What is the power that we're trying to build? And then through this liberatory lens, how do you define who you're building power for? And what does that look like in your practice? I'll kick it off to anybody who would like to start the conversation, and then anybody else can feel free to jump in after. I'm gonna pick someone. I'm gonna volunteer someone just to get it started. Mr. Greg Hodge, yes, rock, paper, scissors, virtually. That's how we handle critical decisions. Thank you for jumping in, sir.
I'll start if it's okay. I think that the power for who is a really fundamental question for us. I would say power for humanity, and then within that power, and the way I work at it is power for Black people. For African Americans and people of African descent who have been in this country in North America for 400 years without the real benefit of fairness, reparations, any of the things that we think about as liberatory. And within that, I would say folks who are in transformative solidarity with us. One of my mentors, Angela Blackwell, talks about transformative as being solidarity that goes beyond just I'm willing to sign your petition if you're willing to sign mine. It's actually being able to really, in a human way, connect with people and get down with people to understand the things that we don't understand, to be able to do that work in a certain kind of way. One of the people who informs my work is Ella Baker, who was an ancestor who talked about group-centered leadership as opposed to leader-centered groups. And so the wisdom of the group, the wisdom of the collective is always what I'm sort of looking for and driving for. And so for me, that vision of the future is an egalitarian future. It's a future that includes all my relations. And I do mean all my relations, my LGBTQTA folk, my queer folks, my trans folks, my, and everybody who people identify.
Seem to have gotten some technical difficulties. So much fire was being shared. It just messed up the internet. So let's see if we could get Greg back mid-thought. Welcome back. I think we hear you now. We've got a little stuck midpoint. We hope you could pick back up the many gems that you were ready to drop.
Okay, I do feel like I'm having a little bit of internet challenge this morning. It kind of goes to a vision of inclusiveness that in my neighborhood, AT&T is just getting around and putting in fiber optic lines. So, we've been dealing with bad connections for a while. The last thing I'd say around this is the notion of group-centered leadership. The idea that Ella Baker crafted around the difference between leader-centered groups and group-centered leadership is really important as an approach, and that the collective wisdom that we all have sits inside of that.
Awesome. I'll jump in. Thank you for that, Greg. And thank you for what y'all shared I too was raised in the South, so I feel very comfortable being on this panel with y'all. Sometimes I'm by myself, but I was raised in Jacksonville, Florida, and I left to come up north, and the institution I work in is a large one. I work at the Center for Popular Democracy, which I will shorten inadvertently to CPD, just so we know what I'm referring to if I do that. And I think I was seeking, something bigger, like for real, for real. That's why I've been really comfortable in large institutions like CPD. We have, when we talk about kind of building power, I think about our affiliates, which are 48 community-based, multi-issue, base-building organizations that engage in justice work, primarily through organizing. And our network defines the communities who are at the center, like that we work with, as those who are at the center of the pain caused by oppressive systems and structures that we seek to dismantle. Because we're closest to the pain, we're also closest to the solutions. And it's not to discount our resiliency or talk about the all the beautiful parts, but these oppressive systems, being in a large organization and having our affiliate network reach as far as they do, we have kind of the breadth and depth to be able to really do some damage on these systems. We're in 34 states, DC and Puerto Rico. And in organizing, we're always looking to scale things. But I come to this work because I want more, right? I mentioned in the beginning, like I feel a deep connection to animals. I too, Greg, feel a deep connection to the earth. Most of my healing on my journey has been due to my connection with all of the beings with whom I share this planet. And so yes, definitely human liberation and seeking to build a mass base of people contending for power. But when I think about our mass base, I think about whole and well base of people. So making space for that. I'll pass it to you, Satin.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Greg. I'm pretty much, power for who? When we think about power for who at Power California, we in particular build power with young people, right? Specifically Black and immigrant young folks and their families across California. And it's not just, your inner city, your cities in California, but we specifically build power with young Black folks and immigrants and their families in rural and exurb California, right? Because we see a lot of our folks, right, with gentrification really getting pushed out to the edges into the valleys. And that is where we've been concentrating, a lot where we build our power. And with those sets of young folks, right, we sort of build power towards a model of shared governance, right, to achieve political power and clarity, where we are the ones defining and really building democracy with our own hands and voices. And a lot of that, my philosophy and the philosophy of, Power California is really rooted in Black liberation, is really rooted in shared governance. And a big part of that is really centering joy and connection and celebration as we sort of wade, conditions that continue to get worse. And we see our folks, we see cynicism increasing right across all of our communities. And I'll check there because I know we got a lot of juicy questions for this panel.
This is great. I think some of this builds on the next questions. And just to recap some of what was said, humanity, right, for all humanity, some specific to Black folks, Black communities, those impacted and harmed by the system historically, systemically. I also heard the land as well. I think that's important too, to think about our relationship to the elements around us, specifically thinking about our wholeness and wellness, young people, immigrant folks. And I appreciate that distinction of, naming the intentionality around building and connecting with rural areas, whether that's in California or otherwise, and thinking about our folks in the margins and who are literally pushed out and gentrified outside of urban centers and cities. And this last point, I think, leads us to the next question is, what is your vision for the future and how can we build power differently? I heard, just a mention of centering joy, celebration, and connection, and challenging a lot of the pessimism or other cynicism that we know, sometimes can be real, very real condition in our communities. So how do we build a different vision? What is that vision? And how do we do it differently? Anybody who wants to jump in.
I'll jump in this time. So I'm just going back to this idea of, my own healing journey and how that's informed my professional work and my work in the movement is that I've studied many healing modalities in my life. And one of them was healing with whole foods and plant medicine. And there's this concept of having a pharmacy in every kitchen as a means of preventing disease. And that's really informed my approach to the healing justice work that I do. So when I first started offering, and, I used to run all of our training and capacity building work. I'm in a slightly different role in my organization, but I'm still kind of have the role of all of the capacity building, coaching, really like drilling down to support our affiliate organizations in the ways that they need to, even if it's not like a, general training or whatever. We do a lot of kind of customized support for them. And when I started offering the healing justice offerings back in 2018, I got a lot of calls from our affiliates. And as any kind of organizer would, it made me think, well, instead of me going out and offering these sessions, and I got asked to do a number of things, like people would ask for anything from, can you help us with some, healing justice, programming for our strategic planning retreat, or, we're having some conflict. Can you come in and do, just holding circles or restorative and transformative justice work, to a wide variety of asks. And so I'm thinking like, look, I think that the thing we need to do, back to the pharmacy in every kitchen and the idea of prevention and just making space for us to be able to hold the whole of what's coming up in our organizations, the answer is not for us to get deployed, but to actually help build a base of practitioners, people who are called to this work, steeped in and informed by their own transformative journeys, wherever that may be, so that each organization, each block, each household has someone. And this is like going back, like this is what we had. Like if I go back to our village in Syria, it's like there were certain people you went to for certain things. So borrowing from that ancient wisdom and that source wisdom that I think we all kind of have seen themes over and over in this conference, we are all tapped into and kind of sharing similar answers and different takes on the same answer, which is building that the ability for folks to kind of create and hold that space for healing in everywhere, so that we are decentralized and that it's normalized and in our movement. I'll stop there.
Feel free. I'm gonna ask to see if maybe Sa'an, you have any offerings related to Stephanie, or just the overall question of what is your vision for the future? How can we build power differently? What does that look like in your work?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, the first thing that, we really think about at Power California, what I really think about, in my work, right? Folks, there's a perception that, California is really like progressive. And in many ways, right, we've reached incredible milestones. But I actually think that, California is really an example of what sort of fake progressive looks like if we were to foreshadow that, 10, 15 years from now in other states across the across America. But I think one thing that's important to really uplift before I get into just, vision for the future and how do we sort of build power differently, I think really underscoring the fact that, we know that we're dealing with a well-funded, well-resourced cultural media governing power like machine, right? That is working around the clock, right? It's working right now, it's working while we sleep, right? In mass producing and reinforcing a mythos, right? Within like white supremacy and capitalism. And how mythos is defined in sort of literature is that it's really a traditional or recurrent narrative theme or plot structure, right? A set of beliefs or assumptions, right? And when we think about this machine and how it is able to continuously reinforce the mythos of white supremacy and capitalism, right? That's what we're up against, right? And so I think that as conditions are worsening and cynicism is increasing, we really got to think about governing power, but governing power that is so much more than winning elections, right? We see our people all the time. Brother Greg Hodge is running, right? We see our people all the time, right? They on an island, they run, and then all of a sudden we're upset because they couldn't really move the needle, right? When they got to city council, or when they got to office, because they were lone individuals really trying to do a thing. And so a big part of governing power is not just winning elections, but really building the infrastructures to not only win elections, but to put our people at all ranks and lines, right, within the system, right? And so, again, right, it's really about winning and sustaining power within multiple arenas of contest, right? And so that's electoral, that's legislative, that's administrative, that's judicial, right? We've seen what happened with Roe v. Wade. That's, the worldview that folks can folks have, right, as we're sort of navigating like politics, right? And that's also the economic arenas as well. And so when we think about governing power and we think about how do we build power differently, right? It's not enough to simply be siloed within our issues, right? Within a particular strategy of how we make change, right? But we have to be thinking about how do we make change throughout at multiple levels within like the system. And I'll check there. And Greg, we'll tap you in.
Yeah, I mean, this is, first of all, I want to acknowledge that you acknowledge that I'm running for office, and I'm going to say a little bit about that in a second. One of the definitions that I've adopted comes from Wade Nobles, who's one of our premier African-American psychologists and intellectuals and thinkers. And he says, that power is the ability to define reality. The power is the ability to define reality and to have others respond to your definition as if it were their own. And there's a sort of neutralness in that around, like, how do we actually move people to begin to adopt the things that Sa'an talked about in terms of a full-blown systems change, a full-blown systems transformation that goes beyond tinkering, beyond political transactions, beyond the things that we're accustomed to. And so for me, as this is okay, I'm going to do this in real time. Just change my virtual background just for a second to show this logo that we've been working with around hope and healing. The conversation in Oakland around politics is not the conversation we need to be having. The conversation we need to be having is around healing. It is around the hopefulness, the possibilities. And I have no illusions that I'm going to change every part of the political system in Oakland. That includes the city council, that includes the school board, that includes the board of supervisors and ecosystem. But I do think that my role and role of other people like me could be to disrupt it, could be to throw it off balance, just enough that allows a younger set of activists and movers to actually put the systems in place. Part of the challenge of electoral change and electoral policies is that people are always running for the next thing. That you're trying to be careful about what you say, what you do, what you propose, so that you can actually get elected to another thing. I don't have any interest in being elected to something else. And so part of it for me is to be like in Ifa mythology and Ifa practice, be like Ochosi, be like the hunter, the person who clears the bush, the person who tries to create space for other people who come behind that person. And so for me, like part of that vision of hope and healing in this moment is that our city is hurting like a lot of communities, and we're hurting from a multitude of reasons. COVID just pulled the covers off. And it really, you know, every single thing that we could think about in economic life, in political life, and in social life, and our health got amplified. Those social determinants of health got amplified. And so part of the vision has to be, as we go forward, I think, is to be able to shift the ground beneath us significantly so that we can get ready for what's coming next.
Very powerful points. I appreciate all the wealth of just perspective and thinking about just whether it's a healing justice work or the frameworks that were offered around transformative justice. Thinking also about the cultural wealth that all of us are talking about directly and indirectly, right? The ways that we pull on our practices culturally, that wisdom, that medicine, to be able to use what's useful and what's relevant to our people to meet their needs. And some things I want to uplift is really thinking about, you know, that innovation is necessary. So just thinking about how necessary and how hungry our communities are for something different, that very real need. And curiosity to deepen our commitment to healing in so many different ways. And I heard words like prevention and building a base of practitioners, and thinking about how we build these practices across our organizations, and how it really is bottom up, and how we make them accessible to our members and to our bases is really key. Thinking about also how we're building capacity of our infrastructures, community developed infrastructures and institutions, to also hold space and conversation around healing. And really the biggest takeaway from this point, what I heard, is the cultural transformation, right? That shift that we need to have, like you all mentioned, healing, hope, and possibility. And then this last piece, I'm hopeful to connect it to our next question. Some of you may have kind of mentioned it, but maybe going a little deeper. How do your personal histories, you know, including your own healing journey and creative practices, how do those encourage you to think about power differently? And how do you bring those practices personally into these organizational spaces?
I think it's my turn to go first, huh?
Yes.
All right, I got y'all. Yeah, I was like torn on this question. I mean, how do my histories, I think, and you know, I think that this might be, I don't know, who knows, it might be a little controversial to say, but I'm gonna go ahead and say it. But you know, I mentioned earlier, you know, what brought me to this work is, you know, primarily my father and my mother, and just like who they come from, who their people are. You know, my mother was a nurse assistant, my father was a mechanic, and they worked ridiculously hard, and they worked all the time. You know, my mother spent majority of her life sending money back to the Philippines, right, to really just support our family out there, to shift, you know, them out of poverty and the cycle of violence caused by, you know, the United States, right? And I think about my history a lot in the context of my family, like who I am, being Black, Filipino, immigrant, like queer, right? And I think about, you know, all of the pressures that we are up against in this particular world. And, you know, there's been a lot of conversation around like, what does it mean to like belong and belongingness? But for me, like, I do not want to belong to this world, right? Because this world, like how it's set up and like what it is, this is not the world that I want to belong to, right? And so I think a lot about, you know, being at the margins and like, what does it mean to build a world, right, in which like I can exist, right, that does not concede to what this world has already set for us, right? And I'll just tell you a very brief story. I was like a young person. I think I was like 5 or 6. You know, my dad was asking me and my brothers and sisters, like, what did we want to be when, you know, what do we want to be when we got older? And, you know, I had a deep affinity for like plants and nature and like medicine. And I came home one day and I told my dad, you know, I want to be a botanist. And he said, what the hell is that? There's no such thing as Black botanists, right? And, I thought about that for a while. And as I've gotten older, I'm not mad at my father or anything, but that was the particular worldview that he held, in which that was not a possibility for his young Black daughter, right? And so when I think about this work and my my histories and how I think about power differently, I think about it, how are we sort of building outside of this framework of like white supremacy, and like what does that particular practice look like, right? And I think a lot of that practice is rooted in joy. It's rooted in connection, right? It's really rooted in relationships, and it's really rooted in the level of grace and kindness that we give to ourselves and to each other. So I'll check there.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that story. I mean, that is the kind of thing that unfortunately shapes the lives of a lot of younger people who don't necessarily have a different, broader view of themselves. And I think that, going back to the definition of power, the rest of that definition is the most important reality is to define the meaning of one's own human beingness. Like, how do you define who you are as a person, as a start for any leadership role you take, whether it be a formal role or informal role? One of the things for me has supported my growth, my development, is as a musician. And so as somebody who plays West African music, as a drummer, as a singer, at times as a dancer when my knees were a little bit better, the way that happens, right? And it happens in a community situation is like, and often, we push up against these models of performative art versus the cultural underpinnings of why we do the art. And so for me, there was a moment where I got very fatigued with doing performances. Like, I got tired of doing the San Francisco Ethnic Dance Festival or Festival at the Lake or any of those things. Now, Festival at the Lake was a little different because you brought people into the space to dance with you, to play some music with you maybe. But I think that the way that I've been healed by this, and supported by this, and having to revisit this, is that inside the order of playing music, there is also this improvisation. There's all of these metaphors for how we need to be as human beings, that you have a particular social order that you might be part of, but you can always break out of that. And it assumes something. It assumes that the history of the music. It assumes that why the tradition was sort of in place, and then you get to move out in other kinds of spaces. The chaos comes from not knowing the order of things, and I don't mean some really fixed order. So, like, for instance, the last thing I'll say about it is that a lot of times in West African culture, people say, well, women can't play drums, and that is the furthest thing from the truth. People like Malanga Cascalord, who was a Congolese artist, leader, who passed away a few years ago, had an all-women's dance drum company just to make the point that culturally and traditionally, women could sit with drums, right? And so whenever there's something that happens, and I think about Fwadia Congo, it's the name of a Congolese dance company, and it basically means, it's a proverb that's a shortened version of a proverb. And it basically means learn the traditions and then add to them. Like, every generation's obligation is to add to the tradition, not to keep it static, not to keep it in the same place that it always was, because that's what gives us the power to innovate. That's what gives us the power to change up the systems that we don't think are life-sustaining and life-giving.
Thank you, Greg. I mean, I answered a question in the Q&A where I said, like, I want to be in a space. Healing spaces are spaces where we have consent to invent new ways of doing things, right? And I think this applies to organizing. That's why right now, so many people have been talking about transformative organizing models. And I don't know necessarily that we have holistically, like, as a collective, codified like the final new way of being. But I know that when we don't allow organizers to show up as their full and whole selves, or when we, confuse rigidity of one particular organizing methodology with rigor, like we can't be badass organizers and, you know, kind of like question the methodology, then we're not adding in, we're not, you know, we're maybe sticking to the science of whatever the art, but we're losing the art, right? The way I do something, the way I change hearts and minds and move people to action is my way. And I want to share that back. And sometimes it's like, no, that's not part of the methodology. It's like, it's just, you know, I think that's part of the mythos that you were talking about, that like, I don't want to uphold that. Sorry, I got moved to say that, Greg, based off what you were saying. I'm so grateful for this panel, and I really hope folks are getting kind of what they need, the medicine, as Juana said. I don't know when I left Jacksonville, Florida, what I was seeking, but I was seeking something. I just packed my bags and I was like, I'm gonna hit the road. Like I need something. I think I was feeling like, you know, after seeing kind of my parents, their dynamic and the things they were focused on, I kind of just wanted to be of service, and I didn't know what that meant yet. But very quickly, you know, I think, you know, my theory of change over the course of my career has changed a number of times, right? I started out thinking like, okay, I think like my point of entry was social work. And I was like, I want to work, you know, I was moved by this idea of empowering the individual. And then after seeing person after person caught in this system, I was like, no, it's systemic change, institutional power. That's how I got to focus, you know? And then for a period, I fell into electoral work and electoral policy. I was like, this is the thing. This is what's going to help us get what we want. And then I went into government and I was like, let's just push the balance of power back to the people, because we're going to create programs and laws and services to meet our needs. And then I was like, I want to be a teacher. Like it's been a winding road, right, for me. And I think there's a little bit of heartbreak every time. Like I was like, oh, I thought I had it. That's not the thing. And like now with my vantage point and all these different experiences, it's clear like we need all of it, right? We need all these things. But the thing that moved me and kept me in the movement, which I thought was like my love of justice, right? I talked about that longing since I was a child. I felt that. I talked about the belonging, like I just wanted to be part of this movement. It felt beautiful. It felt good to me. I love the people. I love like being alongside the people, fighting for something greater than us. And then I realized like the reason I didn't leave when I saw many of my friends leave is that the thing that kept me in the work was my extracurricular, right? It's not just the work itself or the people that I love or whatever. It's the fact that I always was engaged in some healing modality. And if y'all look at my bio, I mean, for real, like I have a culinary degree, it's health supportive cooking. I did Chinese, traditional Chinese medicine and herbs. I did plant medicine. I'm always seeking, right? But they have accompanied me on my journey through justice work. And that's what made the difference for me. And when I realized that, I was like, oh, it's not like, what is the difference? What is the thing that's keeping me here? And then when I was like, oh, it's that, it's like, you know, my crystals, I'm sitting here with this was from my mom's jades, you know, like I raised so many jade plants. Anybody want one? You'll let me know. But like, like that's what has kept me here. And then when I realized, I got very hungry for getting that to my people, which has led me here.
I appreciate all of the gems you all are dropping. If anybody wants to respond to each other, this is a good time to do it. I will just remind our attendees and participants, if you have any questions, please add them to the Q&A. Also, feel free to just let us know in the chat if any of this resonates with you. Definitely for me, I know I'm moderating, but I wish I could react, put the hearts up, because it's a lot of fire.
Why can't you? So
I don't know.
I got a question for you.
I gotta take that up with Zoom.
So I got a question for you. How would you answer that question around your history, your practices? What keeps you healthy? Because this is the circle that we're in today. And as a facilitator, I will take your facilitative task just for off of your plate for just a second. and
I
invite
appreciate you for inviting me into the conversation. A lot of what you all shared resonates. And I think one of the things that I heard in just thinking about theory of change and how we see ourselves, our position, where we feel like change is made, how we relate to these spaces. It sounds like you all represent a diverse set of settings, and that relates to me. Like, I've moved around and been consistent mostly with working with young people. But one thing that I have been really mindful of is that point that you made, Greg, around learning from the past and our roots, and diving into that, but also adding to it and not letting our culture be stagnant. I constantly think about what that looks like in practice with our young people, is like grounding in what was, but also thinking about how do we keep the best and elevate the rest. Right? How do we elevate and propel our culture moving forward? I think a lot about it through the lens of hip hop pedagogy, is like, where hip hop started is not where it's at now, right? But we take the best and we leave the rest, and we try to develop a critical analysis of what we see and observe. Another thing I think I'll say is that through my own journey, I think it resonates what you said, Stephanie, is that many times we're tasked to do some of this exploration of healing or of transformation as individuals. And so we take it upon ourselves as extracurriculars or other spaces that we seek that will help sustain us in this work, that will help us, be mindful to have the clarity that we need to be able to do the work well and effectively. I'll constantly think about, if I want to serve young people, I need to be well myself, right? And that constant need to check in, like, how well am I doing intake with myself? What are things I still need to do to show up in the ways that I want to? And the reason I say that is because I think, there's a lot of mirroring that happens when we're developing leaders that are from the base. I consider myself from the base, just like you all. What I hear from your all personal stories and trajectories, we come from the communities that we're serving. We reflect a lot of that struggle. And so how do we see each other? And I think a lot about, from my perspective and what I have access to, and being genuine with the youth as to what I have access to, is through my culture. So I bring ceremony into the space. I bring our young people into ceremonial spaces. And so thinking what I can offer that are within my cultural assets, my cultural wealth in my community. How do I create access to elders, to medicine making, to local community farms? I want to shout out here in San Francisco, there's Hummingbird Farm, a place where we anchor a lot of our outdoor experiential learning, bring our elders, share medicine, learn about herbs, but also plant and relate to the earth. So thinking about all the ways that, I think sometimes when we think about building power, it is very much in the way of how do we do systems change? How do we push accountability? But also on the day-to-day, is it how is it that we're transforming the relationships with each other, deepening those relationships, having exchanges of culture, saying, this is what I have to offer. I know that it's not, of your background, but it's an offering, it's an access point. It's a conversation starter for how do we bring our best? How do we bring the tools that maybe we haven't conventionally seen as organizing tools, but that strengthen the work that we do on the ground? So thank you for inviting me to answer that question. I think, again, anybody in the chat, if this resonates with you, if you have questions or comments about these topics, feel free to share those with us. It lets us know, what is it that's resonating in terms of what our panelists are sharing. With your permission, I'll propel us forward. Again, open to questions. Feel free to drop those in the chat, in the Q&A. Looking for more practical examples, and some of you all shared some of what that looks like, but just wanting to tease this out a little bit. What does power building mean to you? I think it was explicitly and inexplicitly shared already. How do you describe it? And if you can share any experiences, that kind of detail, what does this look like when you're exercising power differently and building it within our bases?
Yeah, one of the things I want to lift up, and Salan brought this up a couple times in their comment around joy. Like, I think that joyfulness matters, and I've been channeling a little bit with this book. This is a new book, Leading with Joy, by two of my friends, Kaya Windwood and Rajasvini Bansali. And one of the things that they sort of point to is this notion of how to build based on humility, based on experimentation, based on growth. And a couple of key ideas that come out of this: one, that we can't heal what we can't name. Like, we've got to be able to call it for what it is, whether it's patriarchy or misogyny or, homophobia or transphobia or any of the things that we can't heal something that we can't name. You know, anytime we go through some, health scare, that we have to figure out, well, what is it that we call that thing, right? And then we can begin to address it. Number two is they share this idea of dancing lightly, and by that they mean we can't respond to everything. Like, you cannot possibly respond to every single thing that's going on in your environment, and you have to trust that other people are going to work on their part. Like, other people are going to do their share. Now, it doesn't always feel like that, when you're in the midst of these moments. A lot of times where I've been in leadership roles where I feel like I'm just doing this by myself. And I have to remind myself that I'm not doing this by myself, that Spirit is doing some part of the work. And through other people, the instrumentalities of Spirit are actually engaged. That good partnership requires attention, not just to ourselves, but to ourselves and our personal well-being and sustainability. That, like, if you a raggedy tired partner in the work, then you need to step back, right? You need to like take a break. And I have friends who just don't take breaks. Like, they just drive themselves into the ground. And it's mostly my younger friends, like, honestly, because most of us who've gotten a little bit older have already sensed like the sustainability gap. It's sort of like we can't just kind of do every single thing, right? And then the last thing is really powerful. And this is like, I don't know. Like, being able to say, I don't know. Slowing down enough to hear the wisdom from meditation, from music, from nature, from all of these other walks. And it's a powerful stance to not know, to say, like, our elders would say things like, I know what I don't know. There's something in that, and that there's a way that we have to think about, or I invite us to think about our limitations around, like, do we really feel like we know every single thing? The last thing I say, is running for office has its challenges, right? Because people want you to answer all these questions. Like, they want you to say exactly what you're going to do about safety, and exactly what you're going to do about homelessness, and exactly what you're going to do about illegal dumping, and the list goes on. And there have been moments where I have said, I don't know. And people kind of push back, like, well, you don't know, you're running for office, you're supposed to know everything. Like, I'm not supposed to know. I'm just supposed to know the part I know, right? So there's that bit in there. And again, I don't know if you were channeling this book, Sa'an, but the idea of leading with joy is something that we ought to all explore a little bit.
Ooh, I mean, Greg, you said a lot there. Just like triple check on leading with joy. But I want to say to the organizers on the call, right? Really speaking to this piece about joy and what Stephanie was sharing around healing. Like, you can't just only be your work, right? You can't just only be that, right? And in this like white supremacist system, right? I see organizers, we have the tendency, and I did this a lot in the earlier part of my organizing career. I measured like my worth and my ability as an organizer by how much I produced. Right. And again, you can't just be, your work, right? And I think a big part of that is really sort of building the broad awareness that within the system of white supremacy, capitalism, filled with anti-Blackness and all of these things, is like, how are we as organizers in practice replicating the practices like within the system, right? If you are exhausted and you are constantly on your heels, right? How does that really sort of take away from your ability to dream and build the future that we want to build, right? If we're constantly on the back of our heels, right? And I think in practice, like, it's part of like joy, it's a part of celebration, it's a part of, the healing and taking those moments to breathe. But how do we, right, move from a physical somatic stance of being on the back of our heels, constantly being on defense, to shifting our bodies, right, somatically, and not just us individually, but our whole community somatically to be in a stance, right, in an offensive stance, right? And I think that is, that's really a key, And I think concretely, you know, some of the things that I just really want to name very quickly is that thinking about the work at Power California and thinking about, you know, the youth organizing movement and our leadership development models, and we built leaders to be organizers. And that was really the thing, that was the pathway. But actually, right, we need to build multiple pathways, not just for our leaders to be organizers, right, but for our leaders to be able to fundraise, right? Fundraise for these campaigns, for our leaders to be able to do the cultural and like narrative work that we need to really shift folks' worldviews like long-term. We need people in and outside, right, within the systems with our particular worldview in order to really be the rising tide, right? The tsunami that completely washes down this system and creates this and allows us to build a system that we want to build. So I just want to name those couple of things. I mean, we really need to expand and think about what does leadership development look like? Because at the end of the day, when I worked with my young people, I don't expect everybody to be an organizer. I expect them to know how to organize, right? And I do expect them, how are you taking your values and your belief systems around liberation, joy, and celebration? And how are you sort of showing up in your practices, right? In your everyday life, right? In these different institutions and spaces. And I think we really got to expand like how we think about this particular work, right? Because we need all of these things to really be able to transform this system, right? There isn't just one way, right? We need to build an ecosystem to achieve that transformation.
Sheesh, the chat is going off, folks. A lot of this resonates, very powerful points. Uplifting one question that I think was kind of responded to, but just wanted to name it. You know, there's gratitude for the panelists, and there's a question: how would you respond to people who say we will never truly build power by focusing on healing, joy, and grace, etc.? Right, folks who are set in this old mindset, and this mindset that serves the interests of white supremacy and capitalism, right? Oftentimes unintended. It's the right, the mythos that we were talking about, the norms that were really challenging in society. What would we say to someone when they say that we won't build power in this way?
I mean, I would say try it with us. Like, I just feel like we're so quick to center the rage. I don't even think we're centering rage, because, you know, rage is sacred. And, you know, I know where my rage comes from. I do that work. I can identify it in my lineage, and it is sacred. But I almost feel like we're centering the anger, and we aren't giving enough space and balance to the love, to the joy, the things that we're talking about right now. And we have to balance it. And I think, you know, when we were talking about the previous question about what kind of programming, like specifically, that we're doing. So actually, the brilliant Eugene Lee, who asked this question, I am working with her on an experimental kind of like workshop series on love-centered organizing. And all we really had was like this feeling, like this longing for kind of answers to some of the big questions that we're facing and organizers are facing right now. So we have, you know, we were nervous. We had like an initial session. We didn't have much besides some concepts, love in our hearts, and a lot of questions. And we opened up the programming, which I think, to Saan's point, is really important, to like not keep everything so tightly compartmentalized, like open it up to your people, like members, organizers, staff. Like, I don't really care. Like, if you have that hunger, we need to meet as many folks as we can and bring them in to this experimentation. So we offered it to some lead organizers in the CPD, Center for Popular Democracy Network. And folks were like, thank you. Like, I don't know what this is, you know, because we were like, we have some questions, and we left with like even deeper questions, like probably more questions than we started with. But even just having the space to explore the intangible kind of feeling that we knew something's not quite right. What does it mean to center love in organizing? and to create that space where we could dream together, could feel together, to state our intentions to want to change some things about this field that we love. Because when you think organizers, like in organizing now, it's almost synonymous with, you know, things like burnout and conflict and this kind of stuff. And it's like, when did the thing I love to practice in this field that I love get you know, connected to those kind of negative connotations? So it's like, in some ways it's a reclamation. So, you know, that's one of the things that we're doing, is this experimental workshop series. Another thing is, like, I'd run a kind of co-facilitate a space called Wellness Warriors. It's a monthly drop-in program where people throughout the network, and frankly, I've even opened it up at this point to just like people outside who have been in the network, who have like moved on. I'm like, you can still come, because it's a space I hope one day, like, the folks who are coming will start doing more rotating facilitation. But, you know, honestly, I'm just going to say this out loud, because I live and learn out loud. Last time we met, we kind of talked about plants, our connection with plants, how plant beings, whether kind of current relationships or former, have impacted us, tapping into the frequency of them, kind of tapping into the nonverbal communication, the wisdom of plant beings. And then I just went ahead and asked the question, like, given this wisdom, how would you kind of change or inform your approach to organizing? And I was like, is this going to work? You know, and immediately, like, folks had a reaction. I wouldn't be sitting behind a computer for 10 hours a day. I would take my people and go outside, you know, like, it was just, you know, and they're like, telling stories about how, while working in community and doing work outside, they almost felt like nature was like responding to the feelings, the emotions, the concepts, the strategic planning, like, work they were doing. And I was like, yeah, that's the connection, you know? So, like, we just have to have space to, like, do that stuff together. And you don't know if people are going to show up. You don't know. We have like a healing justice cohort, which is more rigorous programming, 6 months, really long sessions. Not everyone can commit to that. When you have an open space where there's no shame, you drop in, you don't, you take it or leave it. Really beautiful, really powerful things can happen. And frankly, sorry, my dog's snoring, but folks just want a space to, like, be fully who they are and not feel like, you know, alone, together, and dream together with other organizers and people in justice work.
Well, one thing I'm thinking about this is that, you know, when I think about people who ask that question about, you know, does it work? What are we doing right now that's working? Because often, you know, you can sort of say, well, you're pushing this rock up this hill, you're pushing it. Sometimes you need to let the rock go and be able to use the wisdom of, you know, previous generations of work to inform what you're doing. I mean, so much of the history of the Black Panther Party in Oakland was, you know, grounded in this intense struggle, armed struggle. And the parts of it that people don't often recognize enough is that people were doing, you know, food programs for kids. People were doing legal services for seniors. People in the party were doing a range of things that counts as sort of community building, and it was done out of love. It was like the love of Black people out of Trump, and I hate to use that word, but we have to take the word back. But out of Trump, the hate for white supremacy. That at some point, like, we've got to balance, we got to bring back a certain balance. And I think, you know, Stephanie used this word balance. It's like to be able to put it in right perspective. You know, one of the most ancient ideas out of ancient Africa was the concept of ma'at, this notion of truth, justice, balance, harmony, and order. And you had to have like 6 or 7 English words to define one concept, right? But this notion of everything out of creation everything through every manifestation of creation is got to be in balance. And I think sometimes we've gotten so out of balance with the fight that we don't know often what to fight. What are we asking for? We know what we're fighting against, but what are we fighting for? And if we're looking for a different world, we have to kind of keep that, and as Sa'an has said, that we have to keep that vision in front of us, because we could lose perspective on that vision of a different world, a different way of being, because we can't quite see it for all of the muck, all of the shit, all of the stuff that kind of gets in the way. And I think that the challenge for a lot of organizers, and I say this across the board, is to understand like where the battle ends. And there's this writing that talks about, if there's no peace in the house, the host can't enjoy the party, so to speak. It's like how to find the just enough fight, but then put most of this in the context of how do you bring joy, how do you bring love, how do you bring that healing to the situation. And it's difficult. It's difficult when people have their foot on your neck. It's difficult when literally somebody like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor get killed in two different cities, two different sets of people not being held accountable. And the examples go on and on and on, right? But it's something about the patience and the need to see the world in a certain kind of way, to respond to it appropriately, but to keep the ideal of joy and work, and that work in front of us.
Juana, just really quick, is that okay? I'm like cognizant of time.
Please lead us.
I mean, just really quick on this question of how do you respond to people who say we'll never truly build power by focusing on healing, joy, and grace? I believe that healing, joy, and grace is directly tied to our agency. And if we're not focusing on those things, right, individually within our communities, then folks do not have enough agency to make the types of decisions that we need to make, right, in order for us to transform. And we're not even talking about communities at this point, but transform the relationships that we have with each other, the relationships that we have in our homes, the relationships that we have with our family members, right? And the relationships that we have with our communities, and the relationships that we have with institutions. And I think the other thing on a systemic level, right? I think that universal family care, right, is directly tied to healing, joy, and grace. I think that universal healthcare is directly tied to healing, joy, and grace. I believe that sustainable wages, economic wages, is directly tied to healing, joy, and grace. And so how do we systemically move our communities, right? Transform like our institutions, right, that are producing conditions where our people are in a constant state of survival, to a place where we have peace and joy, because there's joy and there's also peace. And I think that everybody here on this call, right, peace is something that we all want. We want peace and ease. We want to be able to live into our lives and be able to pause for the beautiful moments, right, in our lives. We want to be able to relax and do these things and just be human, right? And so those would be like my sort of responses to folks who feel like we can't truly build that power, right? Because again, right, if we're hyper focused on, oh, we can't do that, well, what do you think that the system of like white supremacy and capitalism is doing, right? It's all about production of what you can produce, and it does not prioritize your humanity, your healing, or your joy, and neither does it have any grace for you, right? And so we have to really, that would be like, the couple of points that I would share about why we need to truly focus on healing, joy, and grace. And I'll check there.
Very valuable themes and connections across all the different points that were raised. A couple of things to uplift: the importance of and the ways that we humanize spaces, people in our spaces, the humility in which we cultivate these spaces, leading somatically, so thinking about mind, body, spirit, and the elements around us, right? Not just thinking about self, but connection, connectivity, And thank you for Stephanie for the concrete examples around the projects that you're leading. If anybody else has any offerings around the work and what it looks like, for some of us, maybe it's helpful to have some like examples of like what our programs look like, or what our value systems that guide the work look like. So if you want to add to that, feel free. But just uplifting the importance like of what Saan said, right? Thinking healing, joy, and grace, really thinking about these concrete systemic ways that we collectively fight for our wellness and our health and our well-being, right? Whether it's these concepts of creating norms of universal healthcare, universal family care, right? Sustainable wages. I think all of these sometimes can feel out of reach, but what makes them possible is thinking about the breaking of isolation, right? That we're in different spaces, but we're in connection to each other. And one thing I wanted to uplift and ask just as a follow-up question, again, inviting our participants to add any questions you may have. But one thing that stood out to me as a follow-up is thinking about what opportunities we see during these times, right? There's some very innovative things that you all are implementing. I think we see the gaps, and also I appreciate your offering, Stephanie, around, jumping in and just taking risks. And one thing that I did hear earlier is like acknowledging we're part of a movement ecosystem, right? So working together, how we complement, how we offer and exchange what is working, right? What does resonate with the people, and how we are able to exchange things that help us better reach the hearts and minds of the people, right? That's what's going to move them. And thinking about how we convene even conversations, because one thing I want to uplift too is that in our movement, sometimes we don't offer ourselves grace to make mistakes, right? And sometimes we're scared of trying or scared of making mistakes. And part of the growth that is possible when we try something new, knowing that it's going to be imperfect, but knowing that the journey itself and in commitment to outlive a lesson, right? To implement a lesson and to follow through. And, one thing I want to connect back to yesterday's opening plenary is thinking about what was said by Cindy Weisner, right? Of the science behind organizing, right? That there is some science. You have to have some type of hypothesis, what you think will happen. Obviously, always striving and trying for our most critical plans of action to do our best, but recognizing that we will fall short, we will make mistakes, and how do we bounce back, recover, and take the lesson to apply it to the next opportunity to practice something different. So just an open-ended a question around what opportunities we see to exchange, to try, to dream, right? Because in order for us to actually manifest and materialize things, we just have to try and dive in, right? So what do you think are opportunities for us to do that? Give us a second to think. I know it's big questions. Opportunities or needs, right? Bringing our folks together to have these type of conversations and exchanges.
Well, I'll share a little bit. One of these is an opportunity that emerged from the pandemic. As I mentioned earlier, the covers got pulled back on all of the disparities that our communities have been dealing with for countless decades at minimum. And one of the things that happened was that the Brotherhood Elders Network, which is a group I've been part of for the last few years, created something called African American Response Circle. And this was a family, community from a range of vantage points that came together to respond to not just the beginnings of the pandemic in terms of the health crisis that we were in terms of PPE and social distancing and credible messengers and all of the things that we sort of stood up as pop-up testing sites and pop-up vaccine sites in the community. And we compared some of that work to what was happening at these super sites at the Coliseum and other places. And part of what we realized very quickly was that it was the community practitioners, people like Roots Community Clinic, Oakland Frontline Healers. It was the folks that were engaged at the neighborhood level that could actually make the biggest difference in terms of making sure that people were informed about their health. But then we went further because we began to talk about what does it look like in our education system where kids there's still a digital divide, there's still mental health issues that our kids and families are dealing with. What did it look like across small businesses? What did it look like in terms of economic development? What did it look like in terms of a range of public health issues? And so part of what we saw from all of this, and we began to work with other groups around the city, Resilient Fruitvale, which represented about 25 organizations, Healthy Havens Court, which represented another 20 or so, Oakland AAPI Unite, just as the anti-Asian hate was popping its head up. And so part of what we realized was that we had to organize very quickly based on trust. And it gets to be cliche-ish now that, change happens at the speed of trust. With that notion, right? And so part of and it's unfinished business for sure, but part of what we realized was that we didn't have to, as like a lot of coalitions would have to agree on every single point around how they were organizing and what they were doing and what their approaches were. We said, here's the agenda that emerges from the Black community. Here's the agenda that emerges from the Latinx community. Here's the agenda that emerges from the API community, and not have to struggle around the nuances of all that, but basically say, here's what our communities are asking for and demanding from the county government, right? So there was an opportunity that still kind of exists for a different style of coalition building, where we don't all have to sort of agree on every single thing that is part of our platform, but we actually have a reasonable base of shared values, a common set of things we agree on, and that we fundamentally agree that there's a need for a new public health system. There's a need for promotoras and health navigators, and that we were in a moment where we said, this is the only thing that has worked to serve our communities. So there's one example, at least in the post-COVID moment that we're in, that represents a different kind of sort of collaborative of collaboratives, a different sort of model for how we think about some of that organizing.
Thank you for that offering. If anybody would like to respond to just the opportunities question, feel free. I do want to uplift one question in the chat that was a clarification to make sure that we had opportunity to provide more examples. So it asked, would any of you share an example of when liberatory ways led to power clearly being built? Though this is not the only measure of power, I'm curious about examples of the power built as reflected in campaign wins or other obvious indicators of political power. So thinking about how this looks like or manifests specifically in campaign building or other indicators that we're building political power.
I mean, I have an example that I'm going to try to neutralize so that, I don't give anything away, but because I did not ask for, consent to share this, but I will keep it very vague, and hopefully it does answer the question though. There was an instance where a lead on a campaign, there was a lot of conflict in the campaign team. And I had been working with this person, the organization, just kind of, they've been on a journey to integrate more healing practices in the day-to-day of the organizing work. And, they were in a very rigorous training and planning period. And the person who was the lead just kind of made the call. They were on a tight time schedule and all this stuff. And the person who's the lead made the call and was like, we're going to the river now, and everybody's like, what? We're on schedule. This doesn't make any sense. What's going on? And they were like, we're going to the river and we're going to do a quick circle. And we're going to talk about what's going on. We're just going to surface. We're going to name, right? You can't heal if you don't name it. So we're going to name what's going on, and we're going to try to see if we can resolve it or repair whatever has happened that has led us to this point. And just prioritizing the time and space, prioritizing people's feelings, prioritizing the trust in that group of people could actually move through to create a more, I don't know, just like connected whole before continuing on with the tight, rigorous schedule, the planning, the whatever, and interrupting the natural kind of what we've inherited as culture of organizing. And it worked. And they were able to move forward. There was a campaign. I mean, there were a lot of wins that followed that. But I think that even when we don't hear those stories, we see the wins and we're like, oh, good job. And we don't necessarily, because there's also a little bit of, there's so much conflict right now. And there's some shame, I think, around sharing not only that there is the conflict, but like how to move through it. And I think that like encouraging people to tell those stories and demonstrating how that happens and why that decision was made and why anybody went along with it, which there was some pushback, but then finally, when everyone arrived there on the banks of the river, they were like, okay, I think I get what's about to happen, and like, they just let it happen. And they engaged and they participated and they worked through it. I feel like that we need more of that. It's not that we overcomplicate it sometimes, but I feel like it's actually sometimes pretty simple if, again, we're investing in and supporting practitioners.
I just want to uplift some things that you said. I think it was mentioned earlier with Craig, is like naming and addressing. That's step one, right? And also connecting to other plenaries and other breakout sessions I heard yesterday. There's really some power in us naming, and being transparent about our political vulnerability, right? These moments, whether internal, external, the losses, the shame that comes with knowing how difficult the work is and what we project out to the world. We're very quick to share our victories, and that's important, right? Because this work is very centered around struggle. So how do we uplift the things that are working? But also the power that comes from us being able to be truthful and transparent in the ways that feel right, to share some of these lessons, share some of these, not losses, but reframing them as lessons, right? What are we taking from these experiences? What are offerings to other regions that are maybe grappling with similar questions? And the way that you broke it down even right now was very helpful to remember that it can be a policy internal to our organizations. It could be a practice, it could be a program, but it could be a very meaningful intervention that we read the room, right? We see and feel dynamics play out, and that there is such importance in the pace and the time that is needed to pause, to take a deep breath. Just like before we started this panel, we took a collective breath together, right? To kick us off in a good way. Same thing in our organizing spaces, to pause and to be mindful that as much as we have goals and benchmarks and things that dictate sometimes the pace, that we allow ourselves the grace to stop and reflect, to really do intake, and to make sure that we are at least naming and addressing things that we want and intentions that we hold for strengthening, our collective practices, our collective commitment to each other, and sometimes repairing harms, and not just repairing, sometimes addressing that sometimes what existed wasn't well to begin with. So we transform and create new structures, new practices collectively. I want to thank you all. I want to acknowledge we have 8 more minutes before we transition back to our next segment in this conference. Again, thank you all for staying with us through the extended time that we had today. Our panelists, for your offerings, your medicine, your wisdom, your joy, for sharing of yourself and sharing of the different spaces. I know that you all are speaking as individuals, but also representing entire communities, entire experiences, visions, hope that we have for change. A lot of gratitude for our time. I'll open it up just if there's any last closing remarks, if you want to share with our participants, any last words, inspirations, offerings, anything you'd like to share with us is welcome at this time.
Just from me, gratitude for my colleagues on this panel. It's just been a blessing to spend a little bit of time, and it went by very quickly with each of you and wherever you are. But you know, the admonition to stay healthy, to sustain yourself, to make sure that you do the things that keep you healthy, to play, to laugh, to struggle. You know, all those things are really important, and I would wish the same for myself, to be able to have the ability to laugh, even laugh at myself. I crack myself up, so it's like, yes, so that it blesses to each of you. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. And yeah, thank you to my fellow panelists. And yeah, thank you to everyone for the questions and just the affirmations. Yeah, just check just on that piece around joy. I mean, I think that's an important part of being an organizer, is like what really brings you joy, because what often really brings you joy is like what keeps you centered and grounded in this work. And I want to leave folks with, you know, this question that I continuously ask myself in like my organizing work. And as I'm sort of working towards a Black liberation, is like, how do I measure, right, my work, right, towards like this vision of like Black liberation? Is it enough, right, to measure my work by how many people become members, how many earned media pieces that we get? No, none of those things are enough, right? I think those are things that are like very important, right? But I think really what I've come to really know is that how I measure my work is how like these policies and the sort of changing conditions show up, right? At the dinner tables and the porches of like the folks that I grew up with, right? And if they're not showing up at those dinner table conversations or on the porches where folks are just chilling, smoking a blunt, right? Then there's more work that I need to be doing around building power, right? In my community for Black liberation, for the liberation and transformation of all of our people.
I too just want to express my gratitude to everyone who was here with us, and to my fellow panelists. This was really, there was a lot of kind of energy that I had when we started, nervous energy, excitement, and it felt really affirming to be with you all and to know, I didn't know any of you prior to the panel, and just to know and see the growing kind of like the community that we have as a movement focused on this work. And yeah, I would just say take good care of yourselves. I think that we understand that healing happens in community when we kind of start to heal ourselves and then open up to the possibility of doing that for one another and with one another. So thank you for this space and for everything that will be birthed from it. Appreciate y'all.
Appreciate you on that last point. Everything that will come from these conversations, the seeds that were planted, the affirmations to what maybe some of us already knew and felt coming into the session. Just gratitude for the wealth of wisdom and commitment to explore, advance, and develop collectively what a liberatory lens could look like, deepening our commitment to creating spaces of innovation, of imagination, of love, support, and encouragement. Thank you all for your time. I hope that the rest of the conference is spent with equal amount or more inspiration, and that you take this back to your communities with a lot of love and fire. Appreciate you all.
Essence.
Peace, y'all, love.
All right, y'all.